There we go. So we can record this. Welcome to the North Central U.S. Climate and Drought Outlook for November of 2022. We're doing something slightly different today. Dennis Toddy, the director of the USDA Midwest Climate Hub, and I are actually going to do the presentation. I being Doug Cluck from NOAA, National Centers for Environmental Information. We're going to do it, and Dennis is going to start us off with the overview and current conditions and impacts, and then I'm going to finish up with the outlook section, and hopefully we can do this in a relatively quick amount of time. So Dennis, and after we're done, we'll take questions, and actually through the whole thing, you can write questions in the question box, if you will. We prefer that over the chat to communicate with us anytime. And we'll get to your questions at the end, if at all possible. So thank you all for coming. And Dennis, why don't you start? Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Doug. Yeah, throw a little change up here, going in baseball parlance, but that's okay. We enjoy doing this, so we're going to split it up like Doug said. Again, our usual partners have contributed on this, supplying different pieces of information. We're going to be sharing with you national information from NOAA and USDA, but then regional impacts that are shared by a number of our partners across the region. Again, these are recorded and available at our regional climate centers, and please do enter any questions you have along the way so that we can address them as we go along. Okay, I'll do a quick review of conditions here and hit at the various impacts. Obviously, a lot of this is going to be related around drought because of impacts because of drought, and then especially the outlook, what we can say about things going ahead and about getting out of drought as we're going along. So review of current conditions, and I like to point to the image on the upper left-hand side because of the regular occurrence of having a double rainbow in November. Experienced that just a few days ago in West Ames, Iowa, and then the Iowa State campus, which is lovely all the time, but in snowfall, it's very pretty. Okay, look back at October at our state rankings. A very consistent pattern: cold at the southeast, warm to the northwest. Rankings appropriately. Kentucky comes in the coolest at 26th coolest, and then Montana is at the 11th warmest. Remember, 128 years of record here is what we're dealing with. So just looking back at the month of October as a whole, pointing out a small difference here by breaking this up into maximum and minimum. Maximum rankings in the upper right-hand side, and minimums or low temperature rankings on the lower left-hand side. We've talked frequently about increased minimum temperatures or more frequent warmer overnight lows, where we've actually seen the reverse as a rather uncommon thing, that the rankings for our overnight lows were much lower than the highs were. Still the same pattern, but you see the cold there in the southeast extended well into the Midwest, with teens. The teens for overnight lows up into Iowa, Illinois, and Missouri, but then overnight lows still warm out into the plains area, and then similar thing in the highs, the upper right-hand side. For precipitation, again, this is the start of a common theme we're going to talk about, is lack of precipitation. Mostly dry for October throughout the region. Minnesota comes in at the high, or the lowest spot, I guess is the way it'd be, with the 11th driest on record, with Wisconsin, Iowa, Nebraska, and Kansas also joining in the teens. Only one state in our region, basically from the Rockies over to the Great Lakes, was Montana. Montana coming back with having a wetter October. But note that that's a fairly dry time, so that even though wetter than average may not mean an awful lot. We'll talk about that more as we go along too. To take the 3 months, August through October, similar pattern to what we saw, but much more extreme, especially on the high temperature side. All of the plains ranking in almost the top 10, with Montana being the warmest, August through October on record. And then Montana, Wyoming, Colorado, Nebraska, and South Dakota in the top 10, North Dakota just missed out. They would be the 11th, and then Kentucky was the only cool one overall at number 37. But then the precipitation side for August through October again shows, really in spades what we're dealing with here. The block of states in the Northern Plains, Upper Midwest, a solid block there that are top 13, Minnesota being the best of them, and Kansas being the worst at the driest. August to October on record, Nebraska at number 4, North Dakota at number 8, and really no states in our region that came in above during this time period. And then, point out the Southwest, the monsoon this year having a very good monsoon year, but that's outside our region. The Eastern Corn Belt was not as bad, but that has been somewhat dry, and that points to why we're seeing some of the problems in the drainage areas, the Mississippi, we're going to talk about as we go along here. Okay, jumping ahead to do the last 30 days, since we're in the middle of the month. Total precipitation, upper left-hand side, percent of normal on the lower right-hand side. And there has been some recovery in places, but it's hard to tell sometimes because of how dry we really were. Upper left-hand side, you see that brownish area, less than ½ inch, less than 1/10 of an inch in some places out in the plains, and then over 5 inches some spots further to the east. So that is over 100 or over 150% of average in some of the places from Kansas, Missouri up to the Great Lakes. There were a couple storms moved through there that has dropped some heavier precipitation that has improved the situation. Again, it's hard to tell because the deficits were so sharp before that. In the Eastern Corn Belt, still running less than half of average over the last 30 days. Again, that plain area of the plains that's that you're seeing here, very, very dry. And then up into Montana, North Dakota, we have had some above average precipitation. But again, it's a relatively dry climatology we're comparing to, so it's not a big shift or a big improvement at this point. Okay, and then departure from normal, a pretty sharp contrast from where we were before. Warmer than average to the east, up to 4 to 6 to 8 degrees above average over the last 30 days, and cooler to the west on the order of 2 to 4 degrees and a little bit more in a few places out here. Okay, so that's just a quick recap where we are. We're going to hit on a few issues and events. Not as many big events this time around, but there are a few that are worth pointing out here. One of those was a big ice storm that occurred in the Northern Plains, along with some very big snowfalls, 9 to 11 of November. This is North Dakota up here that experienced most of the snowfall. That brown area, don't have the scale on there. This is drawn from the National Weather Service. I'll have to check and see what the scale is on this, where it was the biggest area of snowfall. So throughout most of North Dakota, parts of north central South Dakota also. Just south of that, you see a big drop off in snowfall, but instead of getting snow, it was warm enough there, we were getting freezing rain, ice buildup that occurred in that area and caused a lot of tree damage, power line issues, and travel issues in that region. And then, not a major event, but an event that stands out. This was a picture of snow from Waterloo, Illinois, down the St. Louis area. Several inches of snow in let's see, late October, early November is fairly unheard of. In fact, it was the third earliest snow at Paducah, Kentucky. So not a major event. Most of a lot of it's gone already, but something worth pointing out. A couple other events, we've seen lake effect snows kick in. Especially Indiana, Michigan. You're going to hear more about lake effect snows over the coming week if you look off to our eastern areas. To include some of our west, we had a report from our Northern Plains Climate Hub Director about winds in Wyoming on November 5th, gusting over 100 miles per hour, even to the point where people in Wyoming said it was kind of windy. To see that kind of wind gust. So just kind of a few events, nothing major going on right now. Now let's jump to the hydrologic impacts. I mentioned we've seen this long-term dryness and some precipitation since then, but what's our situation? What has happened in recent times, and to give us a kind of a picture of where we are right now. So USGS stream gauges, 7-day average stream flow. Lots of white here in the northern plains because we have freeze up, so the gauges are out of commission at this point, so it's hard to point to. But you can see throughout the plains, at least, with 10 to 24th percentile, less than 10th percentile on stream flows in this area, and that area of biggest dry conditions that continues into parts of Iowa and over into the eastern part of the Corn Belt. In comparison, you'll note parts of Wisconsin and the Upper Peninsula of Michigan where they've had some fairly heavy rainfalls over the last 30 days, going back to the map that I pointed out. A combination of things is going on here. Evapotranspiration, so crop water use or plant water use is gone. So most of water is going back into and leading to some runoff, which is leading to these high stream flows. Also, these stream flows are probably frozen this time of year usually. So these kinds of rains are leading to some high stream flow values from a comparison standpoint. From a soil moisture standpoint, this is the interesting thing that we're going to note as we're looking at stream flow. This is one of the first things that's going to happen with rainfalls, and is going to be limited for a while now, or at least in our northern areas as we start to freeze up, is rainfalls are going to have to start putting moisture back into the soil moisture profile. So 3 different graphics. Upper left-hand graphic is from the Climate Prediction Center. It's an ensemble of different models on percentiles. So very dry, as you would expect in the plains and the eastern Corn Belt, not as bad in this white area through the central part of the Midwest. Similar pattern from the NASA SPORT model, and even showing some blue up into the Upper Peninsula of Michigan where it's been wetter. And then the lower left-hand side, the top soil moisture reports from USDA National Agricultural Statistics Service, USDA NASS, the percent of soils that are listed as short to very short. So the thing you have to remember also is these are based on this time of year. So if you're saying dry, or much drier than average for a dry time of year, that really indicates how dry the soils are. And in fact, from a comparison standpoint, I just got some data in the last couple of days from Iowa State Extension, where they do actual sampling, soil moisture sampling, and a few of the sites they sampled, there's less than 1 inch of water in the top 5-foot profile. Less than 1 inch of actual water. By this time of year, it should be around 4 to 5 inches average, and that soil can have 12 to maybe 14 inches of water in it at soil moisture capacity. So you can see how incredibly dry those soils are in that area. And so this area right here is the one we're talking about for that region. We are seeing, though, some snow recovery. Here we are looking at our western areas. And again, we're looking at the front range of the Rockies that lead to the Missouri River, the Platte River, and then the Missouri River. We are very early. It's a reminder, we are very early. There's not much overall accumulation from the annual totals at this point. So we want to keep that into scope here. But northern areas up in Montana are running, 150% of average in places, which is quite good. We're going to need more of that to lead into the Missouri River. As you go further south into Wyoming and the front range of Colorado, the numbers fall off. This is the Platte River Basin, especially the southern areas. They're much lower than average at this point. So still very early, but at least some optimism in the northern areas. As we look out in the plains, now this is a graphic. I mentioned the big snow event that occurred over North Dakota. That snow is still hanging on right now. So on the upper left-hand side is how much snow depth is on the ground as of this morning. Scale is on the right-hand side of it there. So 4 to 8 inches or more in places. Parts of central North Dakota, we're maybe over a foot of snow on the ground. I didn't include the snow water equivalent here. That was what the previous one was showing. And then how this compares to normal is the graphic on the lower right-hand side that we're much above average for plain snowfall at this point. So good news, not an overall fix to anything at this point. Jumping to the Great Lakes, we talked about lake effect snowfalls a little bit. This is a graphic indicating what part of what we have going on. So this is Great Lakes surface temperatures at this point. And even the cold, so the greens are running in the upper 40s to lower 50s. still for lake temperatures. Up in Lake Superior, we're down in the lower 40s. So that's still fairly warm for this time of year. And that's why we're starting to get these lake effect snows kicking in. With this cold air we've seen over the last week or so, moving over the warmer water, perfect example, perfect setup for lake effect snows that has shown up in several places and will continue to show up at least over the next week. I'll let Doug talk about that when we get to the outlook section. Okay, wrapping all these pieces together then, and the drought monitor map from this morning to give you a situation where we are right now. Nationally, we are still at near record, I'm not sure if we're at record or near record levels of coverage on the US drought monitor. Not only from remember that the yellow areas are D0, are not considered drought, but they are considered coverage areas on the US drought monitor. So a lot of coverage, especially through that central area, especially through the central area of the plains right here. But even some less severe drought, but still drought nonetheless in the eastern part of the Corn Belt that we have going on. So lots of dryness problems around our region. We've had some improvement Illinois up to Wisconsin and parts of the upper peninsula of Michigan and the far parts of eastern Ohio, but lots of dryness that we have to alleviate as we're going on here. Let's zoom this up into the North National Weather Service Central region, which is the region that we're talking about here, just to give you another example, a little more detail. Big coverage. Even the D2 area, we have nearly 30%, almost a third of the area that's covered by D2 in our region. What has happened on that from a change map on the lower right-hand side, the last 4 weeks, good indications of where we've had and where we've not had precipitation. The green areas from Oklahoma up through, I mentioned the Iowa, Wisconsin areas where we received some precipitation. We have seen 1 to 2 categories of improvement, while we've seen degradations to the east in the eastern Corn Belt and some additional degradations out in the plains area. A few spots of improvement in the northern plains, but again, the snow is not the same as rainfall. The amount of water that is involved is less, and it's not as impactful, especially from way of a soil moisture standpoint. The runoff will still be good, but it's going to be a slow move back to improve from a drought standpoint. Okay, touch on a few ag impacts now. A photo of winter wheat from Kansas, from Chip Redmond at Kansas State. Okay, here we go. Winter wheat situation. Winter wheat is having a pretty rough time of it. Upper left-hand side is percent poor to very poor. On the lower right-hand side is percent good to excellent. So lots of brown, lots of tan colors here in the areas with a large amount of the area, 37%, 40% in Kansas, 45% in Colorado of winter wheat conditions poor to very poor, indicative of the drought conditions, poor emergence or slow emergence, and then some of the cold hitting it now before we're able to get some snow on top of it. Winter wheat is emerged down here, pretty well emerged, except for South Dakota, that is a fair amount behind. Eastern areas are not as bad, though they were slow to emerge also because of the dryness and are now being hit by some of the cold over that region. So winter wheat is something we have to keep an eye on. Last numbers from Brad Rippey and USDA NASS, winter wheat is at very low levels, in fact, record low levels, I still believe, for what's going on at this time of year. Other crop progress, we are generally done with most other crops. Corn in the upper left-hand side, 93% nationally, still small amounts in some areas. Soybeans, 96% nationally, pretty much done with soybeans in the upper Midwest. Sorghum progress at 93% and sunflowers at 91%. So just a general summary of some ag issues. Generally, it's been a good fall for harvest. Even the rainy periods did not slow things down. The dry conditions were a problem, but they've been able to make reasonable progress. Specialty crops, outside the row crops, have had good falls, especially from an agritourism standpoint. Lots of local partners said it's been a very nice fall, good days for people going to pumpkins, apple orchards, wherever, dry, warm conditions, so lots of good opportunities there. Cover crops were not as maybe not done as much this year because of some delays getting crops out, and then we're a little slow coming out of the ground, though people did note that even with a little bit of rain, they did get some cover crop emergence, which was a good thing. Some fall nitrogen application, anhydrous application, not a generally recommended practice, and it's certainly not recommended until soil temperatures get colder. We've been seeing people doing anhydrous application at above 60 degrees Fahrenheit. So what's going to happen is that anhydrous is going to convert to a more mobile version of nitrogen and end up being lost, unfortunately. Some livestock feed issues in parts of the plains in Missouri, where some of the drought conditions have been worse. Other areas have not been noting as much of a problem. Winter wheat we talked a little bit about, and we are seeing some frozen soils at 4 inches in the Dakotas, Minnesota, and Nebraska. I didn't show a soil temperature map because we have some spotty soil temperature mapping in the area. So once the soils freeze, any moisture that does fall will either run off. If it's liquid or if it's snow, it will sit there until it melts and not enter the soil. We'll get the benefit of the runoff, but not get the benefit of any soil moisture. Fires, we're going to jump past real quickly. There have been numerous small fires around the Midwest. These are more harvest, grassland kinds of things. The main one ongoing is in the Wayne National Forest in southern Ohio. It came from Aaron Wilson. Okay, now to touch a little bit more on the drought issues on the Mississippi River. Note that there is a special webinar tomorrow we'll talk more about. Wanted to touch on some of the major issues because there has been such interest in this. A lot of issues happening in the way of shipping and tourism along the river. So these are slides that were borrowed from U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, Water Control in St. Louis District from Joan Stemler, talking about, October broke 10 daily low flow records at the St. Louis gauge. So quick look at where those are and some comparison to some of the other major drought years. So here we're comparing 2022, which is in the light blue or the blue up here. And then that is compared to 88 and 89. 88 is in the green and 89 is in the purplish color, I guess. So here's that period in October where the daily low flow records were. As you can, you're beating out 88 and 89, which were some major drought years. 89 as a follow-up to 88, 88 being the major one. So that's kind of give you an idea of where we were from a comparison standpoint. Or to compare 2022 to 2012 and 2013. Again, the blue up here is 2022, 2012 is in green, and 2013 is in the purple. And you can see that we're in that category or even below the category we saw in 2012 and 2013. So that gives you an idea of the problems that we're experiencing down in that area, especially the low flow standpoint. And it's going to continue to, that's a big question as to when's it going to get better, how it's going to get better. Near term, there may still be some problems coming because this is not a major part of the Mississippi River, but it does contribute that the Missouri River will drop off. Gavin's Point Dam is the last dam on the Missouri River system, that they will go from their usual fall to their winter flows. So they'll go from the low 30,000 cubic feet per second and step their way down through time here. As we get down to into December, they'll be down to around 12,000 cubic feet per second. So that's around a 20,000 drop off that will not end up making it into the Mississippi River. When we have low flows like this, that is a problem that we expect to see. So this is also, again, the part of the problem they're going to be experiencing at St. Louis. St. Louis is a problem area because it's above the entry of the Ohio River, so you're not getting the contribution of the Ohio. Basically, what you have is the upper Mississippi, the Missouri, and the Illinois at this point. The upper Mississippi right now is 68,000 feet. They're expecting that to drop to 30,000 feet in the next 28 days. The Missouri is 45,000 by the time it reaches the Mississippi. they're expecting that drop to around 21,000, again, with that decrease in flow. And the Illinois River is going to drop from around 7,000 to 2,500. So the inflows to the Mississippi River are going to be dropping off in the St. Louis area, which is going to be adding to their problems in that area. So what that's going to lead to is, and this is their long-range forecast at St. Louis, their gauge height, where they were here up at 25 to 30 feet, is going to be dropping off as to where we were in October, and potentially they could see, even lower river levels at St. Louis if something doesn't happen on a precipitation standpoint more quickly. So, the impacts, again, there's a webinar tomorrow. We'll talk more about these in detail. Lots of shipping issues, grain going out, fertilizer coming in, other commodities that are moved along the river are being slowed because of they cannot fill barges as much, and barges cannot move as quickly because of the decreased area. That's cutting into profitability for grain handlers and sellers. And there's also, tourist activity. There's reduced cruise activity because, again, there's limited ability to keep ships moving. Though the Army Corps of Engineers is going to keep an effort going and dredging, trying to keep channels open as we're going along. And again, we'll include some information on this webinar tomorrow if you want to join that. Okay, that concludes my portion of this. Just a reminder of where you can get in touch with me if you need to. And I will hand it over to Doug Cluck right now to take it from here on the outlooks.
Let's see if that's true. So Dennis, give me a verification on what you see.
I'm seeing your preview slides.
Okay. All right, pushing buttons. Okay, you're probably on the split screen now.
Yep.
Is that full screen?
Full screen, go ahead.
All right, thank you. So thank you, Dennis. As usual, a great wrap up for a huge amount of the country. It takes a lot of time to collect that information from our state climatologists and others in the climate service business. So I'm going to cover the outlooks. I'm going to cover a little bit more in depth on La Nina. Probably, hopefully not too much more than you want to know, but we'll give it a shot anyway. So still, as Dennis said, broadly dry. Fall and winter, this is more of a reminder than anything else. Fall and winter are really our big recharge seasons. We don't want that soil to freeze up before we actually can get some moisture down into it, because we have a whole bunch of, let's just say, the bank is empty and we need to fill up the bank, if you will, so that we get regular runoff this spring, and hopefully even before that. Not that we want major flooding or anything, but we definitely need the precipitation now through, I don't know, March at least. So as I just said, soils are thirsty. In many places, it's been a 2, sometimes 3-year drought. And so when you run up a deficit like that, as I've harped on before already, you have a deficit to make up, and runoff obviously is going to be somewhat lower than normal due to those conditions. We also got to remember, though, that fall into winter, unless you're in the mountains, tends to be a relatively dry time of year for most of the area. So any precipitation that falls is welcome. This is the 3rd La Nina year in a row. This will be, I guess, is the 3rd La Nina year in a row, which is a little unusual. It's happened a couple times since 1950. The question is, will it help? And it really depends on where you are, right? So it's certainly better than El Nino in some places, but so perhaps the northern states, let's say from the Great Lakes in the Ohio Basin up and around to Montana, should do better based on a La Nina pattern, which I'll show in just a minute. And of course, the other question that everybody's going to ask, no one's asked it yet, so don't ask it, because here's the answer. How much precipitation do you need to end the drought? Well, that's also incredibly variable depending on where you are. The end result is that we need a lot of snow in the mountains, above normal snow in the mountains. It'd be nice to get some plains, a snowpack on the plains, and not just have it open, if you will, and that lasts, into February or something like that. And then also in portions of the Midwest and Great Lakes, we would like to see some more snow cover and things like that. That's all important for rebuilding that or soil water bank and providing water through the rest of the year. So it all matters. Several very widespread major rain and snow events across the region over the next 3 or 4 months would be great. And above normal precipitation, of course. Normal is not going to get us out of it. We may think it is. We may consider things relatively wet, but if you dig down again a few feet in various places, it may be wet on the surface for a while, but we can really change that around once the plants start evapotranspirating, and we can go flip right back into drought really quickly unless we get some of that deeper moisture. All right, let's show some maps if we can get there. There we go. So this is the next 7 days. It's not promising at all in terms of precipitation. This is an accumulation for the next 7 days. So I suppose if you want to travel during this period, it's not too bad. There are a couple of places that might be a little iffy around the Great Lakes and such with this lake effect, but for the most part, Thanksgiving shouldn't be too bad, and some light precipitation shown by that very light limey green kind of color across the majority of the area, or nothing where it's white. Here's the hazards the next 3 to 7 days. I don't usually show this, but since we're so close to Thanksgiving, the hazards really are sort of the end of this cold outbreak that we've been in for the last week or so. It's going to extend for the next, I'll say 2 or 3 more days, maybe 4 days in some places as you go further east. And it's going to be replaced by warmth, as you're going to see in just a minute. I also want to point out that there's going to be some heavy snow along the lakes, especially along Lake Erie, around Buffalo. So here's the outlook for the next, for week 2. So basically from a week from now through the 30th, through the end of November. And on the left, you see temperature with a big bullseye of above normal temperatures, which is not really what we want to see, because that means more evaporation and such. But big bullseye over eastern Colorado and right where the drought is worst for many, over that area. And then on the right is the area below normal. Now, these are probability charts, so that's not a strong probability of below normal for precipitation, but it certainly doesn't look like it's going to improve much. Now, where you see green, there's chances for above normal precipitation, but again, that's just into the barely leaning towards above normal in terms of precipitation. So warm next week, and then below normal temperatures for the most part, or below normal precipitation. A few of the hazards, and again, these aren't major hazards because we're only in the slight category, meaning that the probability of this occurring isn't super strong. So I'm just throwing them up there just to let you know, because some of them impact the area in the north central part of the U.S. That's those lake effect snows in the upper UP, upper peninsula of Michigan, and actually the lower part of Michigan as well, for some heavier snow on those dates that it's mentioning, and potentially in the let's say northern Rockies and such off that direction. And then the risk of high winds kind of goes with that heavy snow in the Great Lakes. So again, these are not strong probabilities. There's not big, we're not like certain this is going to happen. So this is on the slight category of heavy snow and high winds. Okay, moving on. La Niña. We've talked about this for 3 years in a row. Everybody should be really tired of this chart, but look at it real quick. And now I'm going to show you, well, a little bit more about La Niña, and then we'll get into the outlooks, because this is the pattern that you're going to see for the most part in the forecasts as well. First, a little bit about extremes, and this is a little hard to explain, except to say this is the potential for wet or dry extremes during a La Nina. This is based on some research of the Physical Sciences Laboratory in Boulder from NOAA. Basically, wherever you see red, and this is for the months of January, February, March on the left. January, February, March on the left. That's called JFM to us. And then on the right is February, March, April. So really two 3-month periods sort of adjacent and a little bit overlapping to each other. The reason I'm bringing this up is a couple of reasons. One is there's a chance of extremes. Okay, so there's a pretty good chance with a La Nina going on that places like Texas and Oklahoma are going to not get a lot of precipitation, and Florida for that matter, are not going to get a lot of precipitation. But also notice some of the other areas into the central, I'll say central plains and Missouri and such, also don't do well during this time of year when it comes to precipitation or extreme precipitation. In terms of precipitation, and are more likely to be on the very dry side. Okay, so better chances of that. Notice the Ohio basin, if you know where that to look on that, is above, and that's pretty typical, where you see a lot of that green color, and some indications in Montana, although it's not super strong in terms of extremely wet. As you're going to see from the forecast, it does show higher chances. So in terms of temperature, it kind of follows suit. So we're to the south of us, better chances for very warm temperatures or extremes or whatever. And across the north, better chances for cold air outbreaks and things like that. No huge surprise here. Again, once you see the forecast maps, this fits pretty nicely into that. What's going to happen with this La Nina thing that we keep talking about? Well, the blue lines sort of show the percentage chance of that La Nina continuing, and the bottom, even though we don't say it very well, that's October, November, December. Those are 3-month periods. But basically, as time goes on into the spring, we see a lessening of the chance of La Nina to sustain itself. And what that gray bar means is that better chances for something we call neutral, sort of in between La neutral, right? La Nina and El Nino, better chances for that kind of middle period. And I wouldn't want to extrapolate too far out into the future in terms of what we're going to be seeing next fall. But for now, the forecast is for the La Nina to ebb and for neutral conditions to wax, if you will, if you're into that kind of talk. So here's the forecast for December. Looking at the temperature on the left, there is a better chances leaning towards below normal temperatures across the far north. Equal chances for really the entire area except for Colorado, sort of showing better chances for above normal temperatures there. And in terms of temperature, there's that if you will, that dry area that we talked about a little bit earlier, sort of extending itself a little bit north into Kansas, and then above normal up to the north and west, if you will, across, for us, it'd be the Missouri Basin, including Montana and Wyoming, being above normal in terms of chances for precipitation. We hope it happens, right? At least for those areas. We don't hope we stay dry. Looking a little further into the future, this is a 3-month period now, December, January, and February. So basically the winter, right? We have that below normal temperatures on the left, extending from the Great Lakes all the way to the coast, west to the coast, I should say. And then sort of that band of equal chances between the cold and the warm to the south. So that's a very, very, very strong, if you will, La Nina-esque picture. Same with the image on the right. That's precipitation above normal across the northern tier and Ohio River Basin. Okay. Again, a lot of those places need the water, and so we hope they get it. Unfortunately, the southern part of the country and parts of this area in the Central Plains, Southern Central Plains, it's not a good picture or not a good outlook for them. Shifting this a couple more months forward, looking at the outlook for February, March, and April, we still see that below normal temperature indicator up to the north and west, that huge area of equal chances in the middle, in that warm area of enhanced temperatures in terms of warm temperatures from Colorado, sort of south or sort of east, southeast into Kansas, and then back up into Kentucky in the east over there. So precipitation, similar, still holding on to that signature in terms of above normal in Montana, in the Ohio Basin and Great Lakes. So again, some of that's great for all of us, and equal chances in between of above, below, or near normal, except for that nose, if you will, sticking up into the Southern Plains into Nebraska there. And then finally, the drought outlook, based on everything we just showed, basically the brown color is persistence, meaning there's not an expectation that drought will get much better between now and the end of February in the brown area. Okay, yellow areas are areas of development, potential development. Greenish, sort of that, I don't know what you call it, olive green color is an area that drought removal is likely. So drought actually might go away. Again, that sort of makes sense in the Northwest and places that you see they currently have quite a bit of drought. If they're going to get 2 or 3 months of above normal precipitation, that'd be great. And then that kind of gray, well, I don't even know what to call it. Gray color is you're going to hang on to drought, but it's going to improve somewhat. And then the key points here, just to sum this all up, current El Nino, La Nina conditions are that La Nina advisory. We're in the 3rd year. Dryness continues across most of the central U.S. We've already hammered on that. Very short term, very, very short term, cold, and then warming up pretty rapidly, actually, next week, but relatively dry during that period. Short term, week 2, if you will, to the end of November, warmer than normal expectation, except for the very far eastern part of this region. Precipitation relatively dry, unfortunately, to near average, especially as you go to the east, better average precipitation conditions. And then long term, we're going to be in this La Nina pattern, which I just showed you. Cool north, potentially wet north, and warmish to the south. And and then the final, I guess, bullet there is La Nina is going to slowly ebb away and transition to neutral conditions by late spring. And the caveat to that is it'll take some time for the atmosphere to react to the ocean. So remember, La Nina, El Nino is really an ocean thing. And then the atmosphere reacts to that in a particular manner. And it does take a while. There's a lag there between what the ocean does and what the atmosphere does. And I think that's all we got there. I'm going to leave this up here. There's the registration. I also put it into the question and answer. Hopefully you can look at that. I put the link to the webinar tomorrow over there, and now it's up in front of you. I know that's a lot of numbers, so take a picture and or look in the question area. Dennis, anything?
You got it in there. You got it in the chat area there too, with the link. So.
Okay, yeah, I threw it in the chat. I threw it in the question and answer area and everything else. So, anything you want to add, Dennis, on the Outlook section?
No, I think just a reminder that the outlooks are based on La Nina impacting us. Other things will come into play, but those other things we can't forecast as well. So the baseline of what we're working with here is going with La Nina conditions.
Yep. So let me run. I know. Let's see. I don't even know what time it is. Let's see. We got about 14 minutes. I'll run through the questions. And the first question is, when Dennis showed those first maps of the states and how they ranked, the question was, what's the period of record for all those states? And it's the same. It's 128 years for all the states. Next year it'll be 129 years. So we just add a year every time, and that's how many years of record there are. And I think somewhere on that chart it shows that, but I'm not sure. And then comment on, and Dennis, you did this online, but can you comment yet again, if you will, in public about a growing season risk for apple trees, basically trees, berry plants, risk for freeze damage for these crops this winter season? That's probably something to think about a little bit, and comment on the return bloom and why it's important for these crops.
There's a lot to unpack there, and probably more than I'm able to unpack, unfortunately. Certainly, there's some level of risk with the potential for cold, especially in the northern areas, and not as much in the eastern areas. But we don't know the chances for extreme cold. They certainly exist, but we don't know how bad the extreme cold could be. Will there be snow cover when that extreme cold occurs? And what's the variability in that? Is there warm up and cool down that can also add to freeze damage on these? And so we'd have to we'd have to know more from the growers themselves about potentials for damage. Possibly, we could, especially in very dry areas, there's potential maybe for additional stress on the crop from the cold. We'd have to see how that plays out. I didn't include that there have been reports on trees, landscaping. I think spruces particularly, there were in some of the driest areas were commenting to people to add water even in the fall to get moisture in the soils because the soils were dry enough.
Yeah, that's something we don't always hear a lot about, is sort of damage, because trees take a while to show their damage sometimes. And so oak trees in Minneapolis or Minnesota, we were hearing about this summer, not necessarily because of this summer, but probably in addition to this summer, but long-term drought and things like that. They really take a beating. And as the question about a bomb cyclone, I'm going to just kind of refer to this, Dennis, and maybe you can say something to, is there a risk for a bomb cyclone in early 23 like there was in 2019 and 2021, I think it was too. And yes, there's always, icy, I'm sorry. There is a risk for that, of course, Benjamin, and there's always a risk. So the longer we stay in frozen sort of conditions, there's snow on the ground, the soils don't thaw, right? There's always a risk. The later in the year it gets, like in March, honestly, the more risk there is. Yeah, and probably the risk for more Arctic outbreaks is higher this year, just generally, simply because it's a La Niña year. Okay, so we expect some cold air plunges like we had already. 15 to 20 to 25 degrees below normal already. In some places, we expect more of those in a La Niña year, certainly than an El Nino year.
But Doug, to follow up with that, if you're trying to look for a repeat of 2019, there is one big factor that is different going into next year than 2019. We were relatively wet or quite wet in some places coming out of 2018. So there was more water around.
Yeah.
Even if we did have a repeat of that, which we can't say there will be, there's a lot less water around and a lot more capacity to take up any kind of a heavy rainfall.
And just to clarify from a sort of meteorological point of view, these bomb cyclones aren't that unusual. Whenever you have low pressure coming off, if you will, the Rockies or reforming off the Rockies, you can really, the pressure can really deepen really fast. You can suck up a lot of Gulf moisture, and it can rain a lot or snow a lot or whatever. It's not infrequent that really happens. That was just a perfect alignment of planets to get that terrible flood in 2019. So bomb cyclones in and of themselves aren't that unusual, but that situation was, if that makes any sense. Is there any widespread freeze of the soils anywhere in the region currently, Dennis?
We do have some frozen soils in the Dakotas. Minnesota, Nebraska had been frozen down to 4 inches in places. I would not call it widespread at this point. The potential for more frozen soils and frozen soils at depth does exist, but that's going to take some prolonged cold. It's not going to happen right now. Reminders that dry soils do freeze deeper, which can lead to frozen water lines, water main breaks, etc. If we do get persistent cold over a period of time here.
Okay, comment regarding 1 inch of moisture in the top 5 feet of soil. Do you know how much there was there last year? Dennis.
Yeah, I sent it privately instead of sending it publicly. That is an area. Iowa used to do this all around the state, but there's fortunately a couple extension folks who do this on a regular basis, spring and fall. I believe the places where we're talking about were around an inch last year, maybe a little more, a little less than an inch. So we probably are drier than last year. And there were actually 3 locations I was referring to, so I'm kind of compositing the 3 of them, but they're more in that area around Sioux City-ish. So if you look at the U.S. Drought Monitor map, the D3, D4 area lines up really well where we have the driest soils.
Next question is well out of our area, but we'll make some general remark about it. How's Lake Mead's situation in water supplies in California and other parts of the West? We don't follow that exactly here. Generally, from a La Nina perspective and the outlook perspective, it isn't great. Now, I think it was last year that Colorado actually had good western slope snows during a La Nina year, and that can happen. So that's what we hope for again in the Southwest is wetter than normal during this winter, and there's a good snowpack. But the outlooks don't show that is going to be the case. California is really tricky because it really depends on where those atmospheric rivers, we call them, or big gushes of water, atmospheric water hit the coast. They tend to hit more in Northern California, all the way up to Washington this time of year, or during La Nina years. But it's not unheard of that they can come south as well. It's just not as likely as normal. And then bomb cyclone, we did that. Where can you please share those presentations? Okay, yeah, and the presentations won't be available probably until tomorrow sometime. What we're doing right now. Will dry soils in the upper Midwest allow frost depths to likely penetrate deeper? Yes, and you mentioned that, Dennis. The drier the soil, generally, the easier it is for cold air to get down, right?
Well, it's not for cold air to get down. It's because the soils are drier. There's less water in there. Water has a high heat capacity.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So for the cold to be able to work its way down through the soil profile, it's easier for that to happen when there's less water because you don't have to cool water that has the high heat capacity.
Have there been any studies and graphs about ice jam dams and how they impact this discussion? Not aware of that. I'm sure that there are people who work on that. And if somebody's on here who knows something about that or has a link to that, please feel free to point that out. We do know something about tributary freeze-ups to the rivers, which can be a problem during the winter if there's very cold temperatures. In the north, they almost always freeze. Further south, it's less common. It can happen, and we call those ice bites. And that's when the rivers freeze up and water actually gets stored, if you will, in ice. And that causes the river below that point to drop. So that we can talk about. And ice jams usually they can happen sort of, probably this is a little early for them, but they can sort of happen through the winter. We really worry about them in the spring where we can get that extra moisture in rainfall or snow melt, and then you get a big jam. And there's preferred places, if you will, on rivers that do have those problems. Okay. Is the La Nina pattern starting to weaken? It seems storm systems have been forming that are contrary to the typical La Nina pattern. This La Nina series has been surprising to a lot of forecasters. We'll just say that, and that it seems to want to perpetuate itself, and We're hoping the everything that we're seeing, right, leads to a degradation of that pattern. I don't know much about the storm systems in the equatorial Pacific at the moment and how that may be changing. Dennis, do you have anything you want to say about that?
We did get a comment yesterday from some of our partners who work in South America that Doug mentioned this, that El Nino La Nina is a pattern of coupling between the ocean and the atmosphere. And when they couple well, or they react to each other, then the effects of La Nina or El Nino tend to be more effective. When they don't couple well, maybe they're not as effective. And the comment yesterday was, so far in South America, they're not seeing that coupling as well. So the comment may be possible. At this point, I think there's still a lot to be determined.
Yeah, and a long way to go. That is the end of the questions at the moment. And so we'll take this moment to thank you all, and thank you for the thanks. And we'll see you in December. Justin Gleason, the Iowa State climatologist, will be doing thank you, and you guys have a great Thanksgiving too. And we will talk to you next month. Take care.